Welcome to another YFE Chat Live, the live show that happens every Thursday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern here on YFElive.com. I'm your host, Jennifer Donogh, and tonight's guest is Meena Harris. She's a creator of this beautiful shirt that you see on the screen. If you are listening to the audio, unfortunately, you cannot see it. Tyra Banks is modeling it here. Meena is going to be talking to us about why it was created in the first place and all of her insights in her day job. So make sure that you stay tuned for the next 30 minutes and use the hashtag YFEChat, and don't forget to introduce yourself on the chat on YFElive.com. Welcome to another YFE Chat Live. Like I said, tonight's guest is Meena Harris of entrepreneurship.com. I actually found out about Meena reading an article in entrepreneur.com, and it was funny because as I was reading it, I was literally thinking, I've wanted to say this so many times. You have no idea. When you go to a networking event, or maybe if I'm at a family event, or I'm talking to someone new, like in an elevator, and they're asking me what I do, and I just kind of want to be like, I'm an entrepreneur, bitch. It doesn't sound right coming out of my mouth, but it's gone through my head a number of times. So Meena's going to talk to us about how it got started. In the Entrepreneur article, it talked a little bit about how it was initially a fundraising idea, and then it turned into this female empowerment platform. And so very excited to talk to Meena. Before we bring her on, I just want to mention our sponsor, of course, MailChimp. Tonight's episode is 119, and it's brought to you by MailChimp. MailChimp is the best way to design, send, and share email newsletters. You can get started today at MailChimp.com for free. Don't forget to sign up for our mailing list at yfe.me/mailedit. So we've been off for a couple weeks, and I am totally rusty. You guys can tweet me at Jennifer Donogh. Use the hashtag YFEChat for the next 30 minutes so we can make sure that we get your questions answered from Meena. Before we bring her on, I wanted to just feature a couple young female entrepreneurs that are doing some really cool things. The first one is Mulberry Press Co. This is a company I've been obsessed with on Instagram. I just think they are doing some really smart stuff. This female founder, she created shirts kind of like Meena did that has really empowering sayings on it that really let you know, or you can show other people what it is that the mottos you live by, essentially. But she's doing some really neat things on Instagram as far as combining or partnering with other brands that are similar to hers. And one of those brands that I found through her was Gunn & Swain. And they're doing some really cool things too in Southern California. She is selling some really unique pieces on her website. And again, she does the same thing. She links up with other brands very creatively on Instagram. And I definitely recommend that you guys check that out. You know how I'm a big fan of Instagram. That's where I try and stay as far as keeping it positive, keeping it nice and visual, and not seeing too many crummy things online. So anyway, let's go ahead and talk to Meena. Meena, like I said, is a creator of entrepreneurbitch.com. Meena, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, thank you for having me.
So tell us more about the whole concept behind the shirt. How did it get started, and what does it really mean, I'm an entrepreneur bitch?
So the phrase itself was sort of first a spin-off of, I don't know if you've seen The Social Network, but I worked at Facebook from 2006 to 2009, and Mark Zuckerberg famously had business cards that said, I'm a CEO bitch on them. So working at the company at that time, I was aware of the existence of these business cards, and so that was sort of initially how I came up with the phrase, and you spoke to this a little bit, but that it's just something that you wanted to say to people, and that's sort of how I came up with the phrase, I'm an entrepreneur bitch, which is, I just graduated from law school. I had moved to DC to take a judicial clerkship, and DC, like, you know, many, I guess, one industry towns, and this is on my website actually on the homepage, it's very career oriented, and people are really focused on their professions. And so naturally, when you meet people in new settings, the very first thing most often they ask you is, what do you do and who do you work for? And it can get a little exhausting at times, and that's sort of always what you can expect from people in these settings. So I felt the same way as you said. I wanted to just say, I'm an entrepreneur bitch. And at the time, as I said, I was going into a clerkship, but I was actually exploring a bigger venture with a girlfriend of mine, actually one of my law school classmates. And the T-shirt, I came up with the idea as a mechanism to raise capital for that venture. So we were looking at sort of different crowdfunding models, and she's actually the friend of mine who I was exploring this venture with. Is doing a joint degree at Harvard Business School, and so I thought that the message would resonate with her classmates and aspiring entrepreneurs. So that's how it initially came about, and then certain events sort of took it in another direction. One of those being that my friend and I decided to put our idea or pursuing our idea on hold, one, so that she could finish her degree. She's still in school, 1 year left. And I, as I said, was at that time, I was actually coming out of my clerkship by then, and I had decided to go to a law firm in DC. So we were both sort of, as I think a lot of people who are trying to pursue their dreams on the side were consumed with sort of what was in front of us. So that was one factor. And then another, as you mentioned this also, Tyra Banks sort of became interested in the T-shirts. And she, at that time, also was sort of entering a new space and was looking at entering the venture capital space and was investing in businesses, and primarily those that are started by young women. So when she, one of the first companies she invested in, it's called Locket, which is an Android app. She, sort of as a congratulatory, gift to the young woman whose company she was investing in, gave her this T-shirt. So at that time, it sort of morphed into something really more meaningful to me, which is sort of using it as an empowerment tool, a small, tool that really can, I think, inspire confidence in young women or, women entrepreneurs who are trying to do something that is really difficult and scary and risky. And I think, we look at people like Mark Zuckerberg who go on to create these, amazing companies, but the fact is many people start off and they fail, and it's a scary thing. And so the sort of, as you mentioned too, there's a certain confidence about it that I'm asserting myself as an entrepreneur. That's who I am, and I'm proud of that. So that's sort of the backstory of how the T-shirts came about.
Well, it's funny. There's that new show that's on, Welcome to Sweden. Have you checked that out, Meena?
I haven't.
So it's this little show on NBC that is Amy Poehler. For those of you who don't know, Amy Poehler's brother and her, I believe they co-produced it, and it's first aired on Sweden, and now it's airing in the US. And there is a joke at the beginning of the first episode, you guys will have to check it out, where the brother is saying, I'm an entrepreneur, and the guy's like, so what are you an entrepreneur of? I think you have to be an entrepreneur of something. He's like, I'm just an entrepreneur.
Right.
I loved it. And it's kind of like the shirt but it's interesting. It's an interesting word, because for the longest time when youngfemaleentrepreneurs.com started, I had to almost convince young women that had, successful companies that they were an entrepreneur. It wasn't something that they necessarily resonated with or identified themselves as. And nowadays, I feel like anyone, you don't even have to have a company yet. You might have just a million different ideas up in the air. A young woman will call herself an entrepreneur. And I think that's awesome as far as, taking it to the next level. And I just think it's almost seeing yourself as bigger than just the one woman shop. It's having some kind of vision, like I can go farther than this type of a thing. So I love the idea, like I said at the beginning. Now, really fast, touching back onto the fundraising point, at what point did you say, I have this idea, I want to raise money, so let's go ahead and create the shirt? Was that pretty quickly that you got started with that? How did the idea for raising money for the idea with a T-shirt come about?
It came about pretty quickly. I would say maybe sort of just the basic idea of using a T-shirt for any message was probably influenced by my time on working on the Obama campaign, where that was sort of the first time we were, or at least for me, not obviously the first time in politics, but using T-shirts and gear to communicate with voters and mobilize voters and identify with the campaign. So one example that I had an actual particular relationship with was, I don't know if you remember this, it was Barack the Vote, was a line of T-shirts, which was very creative and a really popular line. And actually, it was a small business created by a brother and sister who had a good idea, and it became really, really popular on the campaign. So I think in terms of using a T-shirt, I think that was sort sort of my influence. In terms of the larger venture and then thinking of using a t-shirt to raise capital, I think that sort of, came together fairly quickly.
I think it's a smart idea. Now, was this a B2B venture? Are you able to say?
It was not, and I'm not really talking about it at this time.
So it was more consumer based then?
Yes, exactly. Absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah. It was consumer facing.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what you do with that. Now, how did you get the shirts in Tyra Banks' hand? You said she's now starting to invest. Is she an angel? Does she have an actual venture capital firm that she's started?
Yeah, she actually, congratulations to her. By the way, she just got a new deal with ABC and Disney to host a new daytime talk show. So that's what she will primarily be doing, next year, which is really exciting opportunity for her. I'm not exactly sure sort of what the model will be. I think there is sort of a panel format, so it'll be exciting to see what she does with that. I was actually able to connect with her through our both of our involvement in California politics back in 2010. So I was able to sort of get the t-shirt in her hands through that relationship, and she happened to love it and was really supportive, just sort of initially, talking. She's an example of, she's a business mogul and really a self-made woman, and in that way, a great model, I think, for young women entrepreneurs who are trying to get started. So she was really great early on, and obviously it was a nice marketing tool as well to have her. She was posting pictures in the t-shirt and really in that way sort of helped to get it off the ground, which I'm thankful for.
So is this from your internship then?
No, I was actually working. So I was a deputy campaign manager for Kamala Harris, who was at the time running for California Attorney General. She's also happens to be my aunt, so it was all in the family. So I was managing a lot of her relationships through the campaign, through fundraising. So. And
was Tyra Banks then part of the fundraising piece? Did you have a direct connection with her, or is this you talking to her people?
I was put directly in touch with her. She was a huge supporter of the campaign. So yeah, it's funny how sort of different interests can allow you to collide with people in different ways, and you have no idea how those relationships will sort of come back in different ways. So it was awesome to reconnect with her.
So in college, I was a political science major, and I interned at a political party up here, and I had to do, as part of the intern thing, was make a ton of cold calls basically to raise money. And especially the party I was interning in at the time, some people that are in Seattle might know which one I was doing really poorly, unfortunately, and they were losing tons of money because they just had to do a big, long legal battle, and so we really had to hit the phones a lot, and it was awesome. It was so fun to see. I remember on that Excel spreadsheet how many names I recognized that were like local celebrities, and you got to call them. I mean, it was their direct phone number.
Yeah.
So as an entrepreneur, I could see where that would be priceless, having that contact list, basically. Where else can you get that? So now, how did then you go from being in that type of relationship into saying, "Hey, Tyra Banks, will you wear my shirt?"
Well, actually, I didn't formally ask her to wear it. I sort of told her that I had this idea. Well, for sort of to walk back a little bit, I was also consulting her and wanting to get sort of her advice on the bigger venture that I was exploring. So that's sort of how I first approached her, and I said, I'm thinking about. I have this idea, and I'm thinking about starting a startup and looking into this, and what advice would you have? And it's sort of in a space that she's interested in, and so I thought she'd be a good person to reach out to, which sort of goes to mentorship and using sort of connections that you have to research and learn from people who have done it before. So that's how I first approached her, and in the process was explaining to her that I was making these t-shirts to raise capital, and that's sort of how we were first thinking of going about pursuing the idea. And she happened to really like the t-shirts, and so she bought several t-shirts. I didn't, which is so generous of her. I'm sure that when you're trying to market and you're giving a lot away for free in the early stages. So she actually bought some t-shirts, and that too, I didn't, ask her to post them online. She just happened to really like the idea. So it came together really well in that way.
Well, so since you brought up mentorship, I read this article not too long ago in Fast Company that was talking about C200, and it's like this super secret, super successful women club. and they emphasize mentorship and the idea that these women that make, I think it was 500 million plus in revenue, really have to mentor those women that are at the 5 million plus in revenue, because they don't know what they don't know. And so in that sense, I mean, what is your idea, or what's your thoughts on mentorship, and how is it important to go after those people that have been there before, or is it important to kind of just have all of those people out of your mind and create something new in order to be successful?
I think it's a balance. I think on the one hand, I think mentors are critical to success. I think that, when you have opportunities to get advice from knowledgeable people and experts and people who have done something before you that you might be interested in, you should absolutely sort of go out and do your research and talk to people and seek out mentorship. I think the word mentor, I have some mixed feelings about it, and I think this is coming actually from my law school perspective, which is that there was this kind of really aggressive emphasis on mentorship and networking in the sense that it felt very forced and calculated. And I think one thing that I've learned to appreciate about mentorship and sort of how I think about it and approach it is that it's organic, and it comes about in a natural way where you, I think you asked this is, do you sort of ignore everyone and put your head down and sort of do something different? I think that's part of it in that, you should pursue your creative ideas as best as you can and do the best you can and the best job. And I think that with sort of that hard work and dedication, you become recognized by people who want to invest in you and who see an interesting idea and want to be involved. So I think in that way, mentorship should come about in a more organic way, where someone wants to invest in your success and sort of discovers. Maybe not necessarily discovers you. I think there's obviously some work that people need to do to sort of get their name out there and sort of basic marketing. But I think it's an important thing to keep in mind that you can't sort of just go up to someone and say, "Will you be my mentor?" without sort of having some sort of relationship with them, having worked with them in some capacity, or have some other sort of interaction with them where they can grow to know you and really feel like they want to invest in you.
Well, and I feel like I agree with you in almost everything you said, but I feel like a lot of the best examples of mentorship in the past have been from people that there's some kind of mutual beneficial type of a deal that's going on, where I'm helping you because eventually your success is going to lead to even greater successes for myself, that type of a thing. And I think it can be tricky when you're a young female entrepreneur. It's almost it's easier to grasp to the people that are saying it's $1,500 and I'll coach you type of a thing. It's
right.
It's almost too easy to just go after that versus really work for that mentorship, build the relationship, find the person that's really going to get you to that next level. So, we're going to get to your attorney piece in a minute. You mentioned your legal background. But before we do, you started at Facebook as an employee. And that's, like you said, a lot of this is of what you're doing now with I'm an Entrepreneur Bitch was based off of Mark Zuckerberg and his infamous business card. So what did you learn while you were at Facebook? What did you take away as far as female entrepreneurship goes? Like you said, when you watch the Facebook movie, Social Network, you kind of have a bad taste in your mouth as far as entrepreneurship goes in the Valley and just male ickiness. So what did you take away from all of that?
I think, you touched on one of my observations when I was working in the Valley. I think, so for one, while I was at Facebook, I wasn't sort of pursuing any entrepreneurial endeavor. I wasn't in that capacity at the company. So my perspective has changed a little bit. I think it's become a little bit more informed now that I've left, but there's no question that one thing that very much stood out to me was that it's a male-dominated industry, and which I felt oftentimes could feel rather unwelcoming to women. So, I mean, from, engineering positions to, advertising and other or exec positions were not a lot of women. And that I think is a problem that still exists that I've observed. But the work that I do as a lawyer, I interact a lot with tech companies, and I'm still sort of in that world, again, in a different capacity, an even different capacity. But it's definitely something that stood out to me even then even at that time, Facebook was only 2 years old. So it was still very new. It was the start of a sort of new era in the Valley. But there, in many ways, it did feel sort of like an old boys club. And I think now that I'm starting to learn more about, investment and sort of the VC world, I think I'm seeing that more, in that it really is a lot of, it's built on, relationships in terms of people getting funding and even, being taken seriously as an entrepreneur. A lot of it has to do with sort of established relationships. And so when you have a landscape like that, I think it can be daunting for women, especially the fact that you're already to sort of enter this space is already kind of a very scary thing to do. And I think that environment can be it can be really difficult for women, and something that I hope will change. I hope to change. I think my T-shirt, and I was hoping would be sort of my small contribution to encouraging both confidence among women, but then also more support for young women entrepreneurs to feel supported.
I like that you said that it's encouraging confidence, because I feel like a lot of people are out there trying to get more women in the game, and I feel like there's a lot of women that are part of the scene. They're networking, they're out there, they're starting companies, but it's that confidence piece that's missing. And when I read the C200 article, it kind of brought me back to this T-shirt, the idea that we're in it, there's more women in it, but how do we get from the 5 million to 500 million? And a lot of it is the confidence and mentorship and just putting yourself out there and realizing that you could be bigger than what you're doing right now. You could be helping so many more people. So Meena, you're a data security and privacy attorney.
Yes.
We do not have too many of those on YFE Chat Live, so I wanted to get your insight as far as that goes. So one funny thing, I've talked to a number of entrepreneurs. My background is I co-owned a web hosting company. And so I got to work with a lot of businesses, and I learned a lot about entrepreneurship just through, building that company up. Working with other business owners was just incredibly educational. And I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs that were in the same boat as me. They started out as web hosts, and it's kind of like a little inside joke with us that you do this and you go on to another company. So, Meena, working with other companies, and I'm assuming you're working with larger companies within the tech area, still kind of like what you were saying, what advice would you give to other female entrepreneurs based off of what you're learning? I'm not sure that my advice necessarily and that I would give to female entrepreneurs relates necessarily to my work as a lawyer and working with really big corporations. I think maybe this does pertain a little bit to the work that I do. There's sort of a creative element to my work in that a company will come to us with a product idea and basically want us to assess what legal risk they may be getting into. And part of that means that we may respond by saying, well, you could think about doing the product this way, in a different way. So there's sort of a creative element to it. But I say that because I would say part of the advice that I would give young entrepreneurs is to sort of stay creative and but also realistic, in that you hit walls, people fail at this, and I think it's important to stick to sort of what initially drove you to take that risk to start a company, or potentially to have left a full-time job to pursue something. And while also sort of being realistic about if something's not working, use that creativity to think about doing it in a different way that you hadn't previously considered. So being flexible too with your ideas, and that way too, learning from, you had talked about this a little bit before, but learning from your peers. And I think that goes to this idea of mentorship too, that there's so much to learn from other
young entrepreneurs who are trying to do even different things. But I think that, the world is changing rapidly with technology and social media now in terms of impacting how we think of sort of traditional business models. And you spoke to sort of using Instagram, for example, as a marketing tool. That's something I sort of, discovered over time. At one time was playing around with Facebook ads and was new to Instagram and wasn't really active. And I discovered this entire world of, and you spoke to this too, of bloggers and other young women business owners. And it's spectacular what they've been doing with that platform. So I think it's important to sort of, keep an open mind in that way too, and to be hungry to learn from your peers. I think that's sort of the basic advice that I would give.
I like the hungry to learn. It's a good one. Hopefully someone will tweet that. So Meena, as far as being an attorney by day, an entrepreneur at night, and it sounds like you're creating something that's not like a solo venture. You can just go off and bootstrap this. Sounds like you're going to be raising money for it and working with someone else. How do you balance that with your day job? And I don't mean in the sense of like, when I get home, I'm going to work 8 hours, that kind of thing. I mean more in the sense of how do you tell your employee, or your employer, do you tell your employer, especially as an attorney? I feel like you have so many other things to worry about then when it comes to creating something else. Because there's the issue of, who owns this? If I'm working here and then I've created this other entity, does my employer have some kind of stake in the equity? So anyway, Meena, how do you balance that?
Well, I think there are different questions there. I think when you're wanting to sort of start something on the side, depending on the size of that and sort of what sort of commitment it's going to take. I think one, that's obviously really dependent on, it varies person to person. So for example, what I'm doing with my t-shirts is a very small thing that I'm able to maintain on the side without interfering with, yes, a very, very demanding and busy day job, so to speak. It didn't feel like it was encroaching enough onto my sort of time at my firm that I needed to formally inform my employer that I would be doing this. I think, as I said, it's dependent on sort of how big this project would be for someone and how time consuming it would be. I think, again, depending on the context, it's obviously the responsible thing to do if you think that it's something that's going to be taking a lot of your time and distracting you from your full-time job, that's something that you should sort of have a conversation with your employer about. I've taken the perspective that I'm a lawyer right now and I'm really focused on that, and I, as much as I'm passionate about my idea and doing as much as I can in my free time, it's in my free time. And I can and I won't allow that to sort of interfere with what is my main focus, which is my career and my job as a lawyer. So that's not an easy decision to make. And I think for people who, there are obviously examples of people who really take that big step in leaving, if they're, by the way, lucky to sort of have the resources and the ability to do that. Obviously, people are tied to their daytime jobs for a lot of reasons. So it's a tricky balance for sure, and I think it's something that I'm learning along the way. But luckily, what I'm doing right now is sort of small enough that I feel comfortable being able to maintain it sort of on the side, so to speak, instead of it being worried that it could consume my time in a way that would interfere with my full-time job.
So now, as you're starting to think about raising money to create a bigger venture, at what point will you tell your employer? At what point will you quit the ties and say, I'm an entrepreneur, bitch?
That is TBD. That's all I can say. That is far in the frankly, I'm really focused on both my dreams, and sometimes that happens in my free time, but also I love my job. Right now I'm getting to do really cool work that in some ways still allows me to interact with issues and people and industries that are relevant to sort of how I've been conceiving of the t-shirt idea and what I might want to do with it to grow it. So I've been really lucky for there to be some overlap there, and so far I'm really enjoying it.
Well, that in of itself is fantastic advice, in that be in the present. and worry about that when you get to that point where you're going to say to your employer. So Meena and we didn't get too much time to talk about your parents, but you guys will have to do some snooping. Since she was an early employee at Facebook, I figured you were Meena on Facebook, and you are, right?
Yes.
So if you guys get a chance, go and look her up, because you've got some interesting stuff on your timeline. Your parents are incredibly accomplished. So you're coming from a pretty successful family, basically just upbringing. And so hopefully everyone will connect with you afterwards, because you're very inspirational. And like someone, I think it was Renata, said earlier on the chat, you've done a lot.
Thank you so much. It's really great talking with you.
So I wanted to ask you just a couple questions before you go. One, because I know a lot of people have this that are doing kind of the same thing as you. They're creating t-shirts. And you mentioned briefly about Instagram. How are you using Instagram? One of the things that I really love seeing is just all of the faces of the women that are wearing the shirt. Tell us more about how you're doing that, because you have 800 plus followers without really trying, it seems like, on Instagram.
It's been so early on when I was really sort of launching this, I was putting a lot more time into Instagram, not necessarily with content, but I mentioned this before, sort of exploring what other people were doing and trying to learn from the practices of other people who are seeming to be really successful at using Instagram as a marketing tool. And through that process, which included engaging with other people's profiles and in that way too, sort of creating more visibility around my account, I was able to get more people to buy t-shirts, who then posted it on Instagram, and then I was able to then post them on on my account. So it came about sort of slowly and through initial good amount of time spent kind of poking around and seeing what was out there, and in that way too, being strategic and engaging with people who seem to have companies or personas or identities that the t-shirt would resonate with. So I was definitely thoughtful about that in terms of who I was looking for to interact with on Instagram and try to create relationships with in that way.
It's interesting. A lot of the stuff that you've talked about is just being very intentional in everything you do, really taking the time to look into why you should be talking to someone, building relationships. Those are some of the things that I've taken away so far, Meena. So just to end the conversation, you've already given us a lot of advice for female entrepreneurs about mentorship and about getting started. But if I had an idea, and let's say I wanted to even start fundraising on a low level, kind of like you were doing with the t-shirt, what advice would you give me, especially if you can frame it in some way around confidence and the empowerment platform, like we've said, that you've started with I'm an Entrepreneur Bitch? What would you tell YFE?
Well, in terms of fundraising, I think people forget that sort of your biggest supporters and biggest cheerleaders are going to be your friends and your family and your networks and your classmates and people who, this goes back to the mentorship conversation, who want to invest in interesting things that you're doing and are interested in you as an individual. So I think people forget, and it's amazing now what has been done with crowdfunding. I'm a huge proponent of that, and I think people, the idea of raising money and fundraising can be so scary. A lot of, the idea of going out and asking people for money, but I think there are so many creative ways to do that now, and the first step, I think, is really reaching out to familiar networks and people who are going to be interested in something cool that you're doing, just because they're interested in you and want to be supportive. I think people, we lose sight, getting so caught up in how to, take all of the proper steps to build a business and to do sort of these formal things, but I think they really can come about in ways that are through relationships and through conversations and, back to what you said too, just sort of being curious and thoughtful and authentic. And I think good things usually come from that. And so I know that's sort of probably a little bit more fuzzy in terms of concrete advice, but a lot of my fundraising experience is in the political realm too, which talking to people, trying to recruit people to do fundraising, even in the political space, one of the things that I've always told people is you can make it fun. You don't actually, it's not about necessarily cold calling people and saying, will you contribute $50 to Barack Obama or Kamala Harris? It's maybe throwing a party and, you know, making a deal with a local venue to get, you know, a food or drinks deal, and you throw a party with friends who are, again, interested in the fact that you're involved in this campaign that they may not know much about, but it seems to be something that you're clearly passionate about. So I think that too is being able to be authentic in conveying your enthusiasm to people and your dedication to something. I think it's really easier than people realize to sort of inspire that enthusiasm in others, both again through the individual and then also sort of the actual you know, venture you may be pursuing. So that, and I learned that again through the political space. I think it applies just the same to people wanting to start small businesses or other entrepreneurial endeavors.
So I could go off on another riff about the piece on inspiring others and how important that is. I read an article, and I think it was in Inc., about how narcissism is a key component in creating a successful startup. It's interesting because most narcissists are very inspired, or they can inspire a room easily because they can get you excited because they think it's the best thing ever. So anyway, Meena, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Everyone, check out I'mAnEntrepreneurBitch.com. If you want to wear it on your chest, let everyone know you're an entrepreneur. Definitely buy a shirt. I think it's fabulous. Meena, thank you so much for sharing your advice generously with us. Where do you want us to follow you online?
So the Instagram handle is I'm an entrepreneur bitch, little long, and the website, unsurprisingly, is I mentioned this several times, is I'mAnEntrepreneurBitch.com. You can go to the website is very minimalist. You can go there to buy a T-shirt. The Instagram is where there's more to see, and I love seeing, you know, that's how you meet new people and see other cool things that other young women are doing, is tagging photos in a T-shirt and tagging the handle on Instagram. So if you do buy one, please do that so we can have some fun.
It was a really easy way to find other young women doing really cool things, just going on Instagram and checking out your account. So again, Meena, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone, so you've been watching Meena Harris. She's a creator of I'mAnEntrepreneurBitch.com. Hopefully, like I said, all check it out. And next week, we have a kind of a similar line where we're talking a little bit more about financing. And, you know, one of the things that I loved that Meena talked about tonight was keeping it not necessarily simple, but keeping it focused, being present in the moment and not getting too far ahead of yourself where, you know, you're not worried about what you're going to tell your employer, you know, down 6 months down the line when you finally have the idea started. You're just thinking about what you're doing today. So I really appreciated that about Meena, but taking it a next step forward, we have one of the investment team members from Maveron. I think that's how you pronounce it, Maveron? I don't know. We'll find out next week. She's Rebecca Caden, and as you can see in this picture, it's all dudes and then Rebecca. And I was like, how did Rebecca get there? And she started when she was getting her MBA on this. This venture capital firm, by the way, is founded, one of the co-founders is Howard Schultz. And if you're in the Seattle area, you know how important that guy is. Well, actually, if you're anywhere in the world, you know how important that guy is. So anyway, show up next Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll continue this conversation of financing and getting started and having confidence in yourself. Thank you all so much for joining me. Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Get into the conversation in the comments below. I hope to see you back here next Thursday. Thanks, everyone.